we are past the appointed time. I'd just like to move on to the agenda straight away. Welcome everybody, obviously, to the meeting. Since our last meeting, there have been some changes within our terms of reference and the membership. Councillor Lee, who has appeared previously as a guest on behalf of another councillor, is now a full-blown member of the Standards Committee, and we welcome him to this process. Thank you for putting yourself forward. The terms of reference are, as have always been, we are here largely, and when I say largely, I mean entirely, to consider the conduct of the organisation and the conduct of members in particular. Hopefully, within the confines of these processes, we will start to move away from the situation that we faced a couple of years ago and up to fairly recently. Apologies. In as much as we will start to move forward without a course of members engaging in activity which is directly marketed on the basis of attacks and personal attacks, and making sure that the Standards Committee is used for the proper purposes. One of the introductions I failed to do so far is to introduce my colleague on my left, who is Stephen Gerrard, and I will allow him to introduce himself and explain his role and purpose.
Hi, I think a number of you have met me already. I'm Stephen Gerrard, and before anyone says anything, I've heard them all, know them all, so we'll park that one. I'm the Director of Law and Governance, who also happens to be the Monitoring Officer. Interesting, I have been now, I think, the Statutory Officer in about 20 councils, because I've worked as a contractor and interim since I retired 15 years ago. And most standards committees are, by their nature, and I don't mean this in any pejorative way, but they are the boring committees. The two most boring committees on most councils are the Standards Committee and the Audit Committee, and that is as it should be. But I gather, and I've known Suki for years, so I've had some of the war stories, but suffice to say, you've had your moments, but standards really shouldn't be that exciting. It doesn't help anybody. So I was saying when I was briefing the chair, my aspiration is, because I'm probably here for about 2 years, my aspiration is, if people say at the end of the time, oh, it all feels very normal, I think that will be a success. So, you know, I see my role as sort of trying to restore normal vision, normal service. I've said it.
So, like a Jedi, seeking to restore balance to the universe.
That's the one.
Thank you, Stephen. If I could go on to item 2, do we have any apologies, Leslie?
Yes, apologies from Councillor David Towns, Karen Milner and Simon Openshaw.
Thank you very much. We have not, as far as I'm aware, and certainly haven't been given to me, any disclosures of interest in relation to any matters that are on the agenda today. Does any member have anything that they wish to bring in at short notice, or are we happy? Thank you. If we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which is a matter of notation and understanding and whether or not the information within it is correct. Do members agree that the minutes are a correct showing of the previous meeting? Agreed. Thank you. I would like to go on to the next item, which are the reports of the monitoring officer. And although at this stage an invited guest, he's a very important invited guest. So I would like Stephen perhaps to talk in relation to the independent desktop review and some of the thoughts that he may well have about how we progress that in the future, whilst also looking at the element of update that has been provided by Neil.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose it's slopey shoulder time in a way. I've only been here, I think this is week 4 now. So a lot of this is historical legacy stuff which I've inherited, and indeed even the reports and are reports which have been written about things which happened previously. And I think Neil did send around, and he gives his apologies today because he's had to be elsewhere. But if you have a look, and I think this came to everybody, didn't it? The schedule, the action log, lessons learned review, and it's a long list of things which are red and amber. Now, I have a proposition, Chair, which is I will bring to the next meeting, if members are content, what I would call a monitoring officer toolkit. And I think that will cover all these points. So it'll be a flow chart about process. It will be a list of criteria that will be applied sequentially to sift out the non-meritorious claims and to make sure that those matters which need investigating go for investigation. And that will be something which I would ask this committee then to consider, comment upon and endorse. It will be published and reviewed from time to time. It'll be the basis upon which then I can conduct my work over the next couple of years in conjunction particularly with the chair and the independent persons. And it'll also mean, I think, that there's been no ambiguity when members come to make a complaint, so that when, hypothetically, somebody says they trod on my toe and I say, well, that's not something I'm going to investigate, they will know why. If, on the other hand, I do investigate, again, it will be clear as to why I'm investigating and the process. I would also like to put in there, because one of my observations is, don't things take a long time? And I would quite like to get to the point where things are dealt with quickly. And to that end, I would try and put in some indicative timelines. You can never say always, because sometimes there are reasons people are absent, people are ill, people are unavailable, but some indicative timelines for actually resolving matters and bringing them to the conclusion. Because frankly, you either need to say I'm not investigating it, or you need to investigate it and you need to do it quickly. So that's my proposition. If you're willing to accept that, Chair, I will undertake to bring that to the next meeting in that form.
Thank you, Stephen. A little bit of cart before horse, I guess. The report was in relation to the update that was provided. So I'd like to give members an opportunity in the first instance to either question or comment upon that report. And then if we are all happy as a group and as a committee, I would then seek for a proposal from the floor in relation to what Stephen's just outlined. So if we could start with the actual report that came to you and that update. Are there any questions that any members have or any comments that they wish to make? Councillor Sesford.
Just in relation to what Stephen's just said there, you mentioned that you will try to expedite things as quick as you can and this and that, but I seem to remember from the report or another report is that the deputy monitoring officers were going to be tasked with this jobs. There was going to be 2 or 3 of them, 2 of them or 1 of them, trained up to do it first port of entry before it got to you.
Yes, thank you. I've appointed 2 deputy monitoring officers, and I think that part of the problem before was that in some instances the monitoring officer herself was conflicted out from some of these. And I think perhaps the deputies were not as skilled up as they might be. I'll make sure that they are, and at the same time I'll make sure that I'm not conflicted out.
Happy with that as a response? Thank you.
That's fine, thank you.
Any further comment from the floor? As it was a matter of report rather than any recommendation per se, there's no need to vote in relation to that. However, what I would like is I would like somebody from the floor to propose what Stephen has outlined. So I have a proposer.
Yeah, I'll propose that, Chair.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please? 1,000,001. Thanks very much. You've got that noted?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So if we pass on to the next item, which is the progress report on the complaints. Again, Stephen, do you want to pick up on this in Neil's absence, or do you want me just to sit through?
No, by all means. By all means. I mean, sort of reverting to my theme of normality, it does seem that the number of complaints has, for whatever reason, started to decline. And even the numbers in here are a bit misleading, because although it talks about 6 complaints, in practice, some of those are ensemble complaints. So really, I think we're down to 2, which would be about normal. And I think one of those will hopefully resolve away. What I won't promise to do is to control the number of parish council complaints, because I have no leverage there, and they're the gift that keeps on giving. And you have so many of them. You have more parish councils within the council than, in fact, there are top-tier authorities in the country. So on that basis, there are always going to be a lot coming through. But regardless of that, I would suggest that actually this is a good picture, and I think it speaks well of the council and of members themselves, who I think have started to see that there are other ways to deal with issues. And I can understand why people use the Standards Committee, but it's at best a blunt tool. At worst, it's counterproductive. Yeah.
Any members, any questions or comments in relation to that? Could I just sort of canvass opinion on the actual presentation of the information? Are you happy that it is in a format that you can readily use?
No.
Excellent. Would you care to expand on that, Stephen?
I think what I'd like to see is a simple table which enables you to see what it was over the previous, say, 3 quarters and what it is this quarter, because the important thing is trends. What happened this quarter tells you nothing. So it's about, are they going up? Are they going down? Maybe some indication about, are there hot spots? So, you know, is there a parish council which has a particularly complex set of relationships which is causing a lot of difficulty? I'd like to highlight those and bring them out. Some of those we may not be able to do much about. Sometimes it may be a question of putting in some other support. Standards, you know, I make it up, but if you have a parish council or a town council where everyone's fallen out, using the standards regime is not going to make them play nicely together, and we may need to start thinking about some other intervention. So, I'm happy to consult with you, Chair, about what might be the best way to present this in future so that you can pick out the salient points.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think on the back of that, obviously we would look to cascade any of that information through the members, and especially to the parish councils at the very earliest opportunity, and I'm sure that's something that will be built into Stephen's plans and recommendations. And I think that is an area that we have as a committee often debated and discussed, and that is, how do we get information out, in particular to the parish councils, given the numerous ones that we have, and that full-blown membership of parish councillors. So again, that's something I think, as long as the committee are happy with, I would look to charge Stephen and his team to do, so that we can try and build in a proper process, but a process that ultimately gets disseminated as fully and as quickly as possible. Again, I hope that you're happy for me just to charge Stephen to produce that and do that at the earliest opportunity. Is your plan for that to come out for next meeting, Stephen?
You caught me a bit on the hop, I suppose. But having said that, What I've seen elsewhere, which works quite well, is that perhaps there's a 6-monthly newsletter that goes out from the committee to all of the constituent authorities for whom you provide oversight, highlighting perhaps issues that they may wish to think about, traps to avoid, that sort of thing. And I think that can work quite well. Happy to undertake to do that.
Brilliant. That's good thinking. I'm very pleased with that as a way forward. Councillor Reid.
Thanks. That sounds very good, but you're going to need to be very, very careful how you write anything like that, because people in the parishes hate us to start with. So us writing to them saying this is how you should do things, just need to be very careful of the language you use, because if it at all appears like they are being told what to do, you know, you'll have more complaints against you than you had out dinners. So just be careful how you write it.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if you want to come back to that, Stephen, but I think the plan.
Noted.
I think the plan would be that we will note that, but anything that is likely to go ahead in the future will have to come through this committee first, and we will give it a good kick around the park before we decide to go in any particular direction with it. And Stephen is very focused on the idea of what we put in place now is right, and it's right first time. And it's something I'm sure we all agree with. So, thank you. Any further comments or questions in relation to that item? Councillor Stewart.
Stephen, would it be possible for the committee to get copies of these other e-letters which have gone out you referred to? I don't want the most exciting ones. I just want the boring ones to come out, everyday sort of things.
Are you saying examples from elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, please.
I'll see what I can do in that regard, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, if we've closed that particular item, we can actually go on to a report from the Director of Law and Governance.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an odd one. I'm not quite sure how. Well, I think I do know how it arose, but this is to do with the fact that on the council website there are two occasions when members' addresses can be published. The first is on the front page. You'll have all your pictures, and you'll normally have contact details, which will include email addresses, telephone numbers, and addresses. And most councillors, I would suggest, probably want that up there, but some councillors don't. And in that regard, if councillors do not want on the bit that the council publishes, which says, here's your local councillor, these are the details, we can, if members want for any particular reason, and there are good reasons why some don't, we don't have to publish the home address. It gets slightly more problematic when your home address is also a disclosable pecuniary interest in the Register of Interests. And for those fortunate enough to own their own homes, that'll probably also be their home address. And so when you declare your property ownership, you declare your home address. For those members who are less fortunate or live with others, they won't. And so, in a sense, it's not a problem for them. The difficulty with disclosable pecuniary interests are they have to be published by law, otherwise there are criminal sanctions. And like it or, if you don't like that arrangement, I suggest you phone Mr. Pickles, who did all this in 2011, and it is what it is. However, I have a power, if people actually have a good reason, it has to be a good reason, I have a power to actually redact and to put in something which just says redacted at the on the basis of a decision by the monitoring officer, and just leave it at that. But it has to be done on an individual basis. I cannot grant a blanket dispensation to all members not to essentially fill out their register of disclosable pecuniary interests. But what I will undertake to do is to send a reminder out to all members that if any member feels that they have a compelling reason to have that redacted from their register of disclosable pecuniary interests to do it. And I have to say, I have been asked on a number of occasions to do this, and I don't think I've ever had a member where I've said, no, that's not reasonable. There's all sorts of reasons why members want to do it. Sometimes they have relationship problems and they don't wish to include it. Sometimes they have local constituents who are particularly troublesome. For many members, it doesn't matter. And I think that came out in the survey. You know, it was sort of evenly split, which is what I'd expect. But I think the important thing is, and I'm happy to undertake to do this, we will write to all members and remind them that if anyone has particular concerns, if they contact me, I will happily talk it through with them and see what can be done.
Thanks, Stephen. Councillor Sesford.
Yeah, thank you. We've obviously discussed this a few times in previous meetings, and one question that springs to, well, one question, two parts springs to mind quite quickly is would it not have been sensible to check the legislation first before we continued carried out a consultation, because really the consultation has possibly been slightly waste of time, because if you vote for a blanket ban, well, you can't do that. So that seemed to it, which is actually what I believe the outcome of it was. So that's one part. If I can just also ask, as we can do this as county councillors, what happens if you're also a town councillor and a parish councillor? Because your names will be on their lists, registers, whatever as well.
You make a good point, Councillor. I have raised this issue, and I think, yes, let's just say, read the manual. And I have made that point. In terms of, I had the same power applies in respect to parish and town councils, and I think that, you know, for example, maybe that's something you can put in the newsletter that goes out to remind people that if they have that requirement, then we can deal with it. We will keep the register of interest for the parish councils, and I think they will be posted on our website, or there'll be links to them on our website. So that's one of our responsibilities and accountabilities. So yes, I would hope I won't be inundated, because it'll. And in practice, most councillors want their name and address published, but for obvious reasons. You know, but in certain circumstances they don't.
Thanks, Stephen. Coming back to your first point, Councillor, and Stephen wasn't here and part and parcel of that particular discussion, but it's clear from the considerations that Stephen's given that myself as chair have sent you down the wrong route. And for that, I can only apologise. All the things we do are well-intentioned and well-meaning, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are correct. So I think it's a point well made, and I think it's a point you take on the chin. We sent you down the wrong way. Councillor Floats.
I agree wholeheartedly with what that Stephen said there. Basically, we can only do what we can do under the rules. However, it is a bit silly when someone has a care of County Hall Morpeth address on their front page, and there's immediately a link to a PDF which lists their land they own, which obviously shows their address, by one click of a mouse. And it's just something ludicrous, really, in the terms of people when that happens. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it just seems ludicrous.
I'm confident in those circumstances, if they speak to me, a solution can be found. But the problem is it has to be a one-on-one conversation. I cannot give a universal dispensation. It has to be considered on the individual merits.
So two things. As a group, are you happy to accept the apology from the chair? And secondly, are you prepared to accept the sage counsel from Stephen and charge him as a committee to produce any documentation or report that's required in relation to that? Excellent. Thank you. Now, given that we didn't get a flying start because of the fire alarm, I think we've done relatively well. So all credit to yourselves and power to your elbow. I'm not aware of any urgent business. Certainly nothing's been brought to my attention. I don't think anything's been brought to Stephen's attention. No. Does any member have anything they urgently wish to bring to the floor that I may or may not consider worthwhile? Excellent. In which case, I will schedule the next meeting, which should be the 12th of October, fire alarms allowing, 2 p.m, again in the council chamber at County Hall. Once again, thank you all very much for your time and for your efforts and your sage counsel. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Leslie. Meeting closed.